Okay, let's just dive right in. Today, we're doing an explainer on a mind-bending 13-year legal saga that's honestly going to upend everything you think you know about analyzing a crime scene. We're looking at a case that shifts so dramatically from its initial assumptions, it really forces us to question the very nature of criminal investigations. I mean, how much can an early narrative totally blind us to the actual physical evidence? Let's find out. So, we start our narrative in Georgetown, Indiana. Picture this. It's a quiet rural town, top-tier schools, and a super close-knit population of less than 4,000 people. You know the type of place, where people literally didn't even lock their doors at night. But that cozy illusion of the perfect nuclear family was about to be brutally shattered for one particular household.
And that brings us to the chilling question, acting as our guide through this incredibly complex case file. Was it a husband's ultimate betrayal, or the work of a random killer? Over a decade of trials, two wildly divergent narratives emerged, and we're going to use the evidence to see exactly how investigators wrestled with this exact question.
That takes us to Part 1, the picture-perfect illusion. To really understand this investigation, we first have to look at the massive contrast between public perception and private reality. On paper, David Camm was a respected former state trooper, and his wife Kim was a devoted accountant and mom to 7-year-old Brad and 5-year-old Jill. But the reality? Well, David had a highly documented history of deceit. The guy was a serial cheater who literally used his squad car for hookups. At one point, he even demanded a divorce while Kim was 5 months pregnant, only to manipulate his way back into her life later on. So for the prosecution, this showed a clear, documented desire to escape his family life.
Now, let's move right into Section 2, the night of the murders. Let's examine the grim reality investigators walked into on September 28, 2000, inside the Camm family garage after David called the police at 9:29 p.m. The scene was bizarre. Honestly, it felt almost staged. Kim, Brad, and Jill were tragically found shot to death, but notice these chilling details. Kim was found in only her underwear, yet her shoes were placed perfectly, neatly on top of the family's Ford Bronco. There were unidentified fingerprints on the vehicle. And, perhaps most importantly, a mysterious gray sweatshirt was found tucked underneath young Brad's body. You absolutely have to remember these details for later because they completely contradicted the initial theory.
So despite all that weird evidence, the investigation immediately zeroed in on David. Why? A critical timeline discrepancy. Now, David's alibi was ironclad on the surface. He was playing basketball at a local church, and 11 separate witnesses confirmed he never left the court between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. But the prosecution pulled phone records showing a call made from the Camm's house landline at 7:19 p.m. Since the church was only an 8-minute drive away, police believed he slipped out, committed the crime, and went back. But here's the catch. The defense would later point out a massive flaw. Thanks to Indiana's famously confusing dual time zones, the phone company timestamp was actually a full hour off. That put the call in the 6 p.m. hour, before David even left for basketball.
With the timeline in question, the crucial point the prosecution used to arrest David came down to physical evidence, specifically 8 microscopic specks of his daughter Jill's blood found on his t-shirt. The prosecution brought in analysts who interpreted this as high-velocity impact spatter, arguing it could only get there if David pulled the trigger. David, on the other hand, maintained a much simpler explanation. He said the blood transferred onto his shirt when he reached into the vehicle and desperately pulled his son Brad's body from the car to attempt CPR. Ultimately, the jury sided with this spatter theory. In 2000, David was arrested, and by 2002, he was convicted of triple murder and handed a 195-year sentence. But, plot twist, in 2004, an appellate court overturned the conviction. They ruled that the prosecution's endless parade of witnesses testifying about David's affairs was highly prejudicial. Just as it seemed like his fate was sealed, the justice system hit the reset button. And this set the stage for a discovery that would flip the entire investigation upside down.
Which brings us to Section 3, the sweatshirt DNA twist.
Right before the second trial, David's defense team demanded something the prosecution completely neglected to do: comprehensive DNA testing on that mysterious gray sweatshirt left at the crime scene. And when those results finally came back, they were absolutely explosive. The DNA matched a man named Charles Boney, a convicted felon living just 10 minutes away. He had a history of armed robbery and attempted abduction. But get this, the most chilling detail? Boney had a documented fetish for stealing women's shoes during his crimes. Suddenly, Kim's shoes being neatly removed and placed on top of the car made terrifying sense. When police confronted Boney, his story shifted wildly. Step 1, he claimed he just donated the sweatshirt and had zero involvement. But then, after failing a polygraph, we hit Step 2.
He confessed to meeting David Camm and selling him an untraceable gun for $250. Then, in step 3, his story evolved yet again. He claimed he went to the house to deliver the gun wrapped in his sweatshirt, witnessed David shoot his own family, and then, supposedly in a total panic while running for his life, somehow took the time to neatly pick up Kim's shoes and place them on the roof of the car. Yeah, it's a lot to process.
This brings us to Section 4. 2 suspects, 2 convictions. The pendulum of guilt was swinging so wildly now. Investigators were trying to reconcile evidence against 2 entirely different men. The state found themselves in an impossible position here. On one side, the case against David Camm, you've got the 8 drops of blood, a history of severe infidelity providing a theoretical motive, and now Boney's testimony. But on the other side, look at the staggering physical evidence against Boney. His DNA on the sweatshirt, his DNA on Kim's underwear, his DNA under Kim's fingernails indicating a struggle, and his literal handprint on the victim's vehicle. So, looking at the facts, the state decided the only solution was to argue that both men were involved. They decided to prosecute them under a massive grand conspiracy theory.
And amazingly, this dual prosecution strategy actually worked, at least at first. In 2005, Bonnie was convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to 225 years. A year later, David was convicted in his second trial and sentenced to life in prison. Now, because the prosecution couldn't use the infidelity motive anymore, they pivoted to entirely baseless abuse allegations against David to get this conviction. And because those allegations lacked literally any medical or physical evidence, the Indiana Supreme Court stepped in and overturned David's second conviction in 2009. The legal ping-pong just continued, subjecting the victim's family and the accused to a grueling, tragic cycle of trials and reversals.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the final verdict. After a staggering 13 years of legal battles, David faced his third and final trial in 2013. But this time, he was armed with overwhelming DNA evidence pointing squarely at Charles Boney. The defense drove home the physical evidence, the DNA under the fingernails, the handprint, the shoe fetish. And it was enough. On October 24, 2013, David Camm was officially acquitted of all charges. But the damage? It was irrevocable. Listen to this quote from Frank, Kim's father, given after the acquittal. "All we want is the truth, and the truth is Dave's guilty. That's all we can ask for." Kim's devastated parents steadfastly refused to believe in David's innocence, which really highlights the permanent, unhealable fractures left by this botched investigation. Following his acquittal, David Camm filed a civil suit against the authorities for his wrongful imprisonment. His argument was that they willfully ignored evidence just to force their narrative. In the end, he settled for a staggering $5 million. But honestly, how do you even begin to rebuild 13 lost years of your life, your reputation, and your freedom?
So what does this all mean for us? Why does this matter? Well, this case serves as a vital anchor for statistics cited in the source material we're looking at. Research suggests that up to roughly 5% of inmates in American prisons today might actually be innocent. 5%. That might sound like a tiny slice of the pie, but we are talking about tens of thousands of lives completely derailed by tunnel vision, flawed forensic interpretations, and a justice system that often really struggles to admit when it got the story wrong.
If a perfectly ordinary night can dissolve into 13 years of legal chaos, how much faith can we truly place in the very first glance at a crime scene? I'm going to leave you with that provocative thought as we wrap up today's explainer. It's a pretty stark reminder to always question how shifting perspectives and the stories we choose to tell ourselves about the evidence can completely alter the pursuit of justice. Keep analyzing, keep asking questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.